Hello and welcome to another discussion in the SF Masterworks reading group. We are working our way through the SF Masterworks published by Colanx in their order of publication as Masterworks. We read one book every month. The book for June this year is The Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg, who is an author we haven't encountered before in uh, in this series. And coming up next for the next few months, if you're reading along with us or you would like to pick and choose as we go, the next book was apparently published as a bind up of two books, The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I think right now they're being published separately, but in either case, we're going to do them over 2 months. So July will be The Time Machine and August will be The War of the Worlds. September will be Flowers for Algernon by Danielle Keyes. And then we'll be back to Philip K. Dick with Ubik in what month are we on? October. that's the that's the plan for the upcoming 4 months. If you'd like to read any of these with us, you're welcome to join us either here in this discussion group or just talk to us in text on the Page Chewing forum. There's usually a discussion group going for, there's a thread going for any of these books. I think that's all the administrative stuff. My name is Varsha. I run the YouTube channel Reading by the Rainy Mountain, and I'm on a bunch of podcasts with many of these folks. And I sometimes remember to post the episodes that we record. Leila, could you introduce yourself? And then we'll go around.
Oh, sure. I'm Leila Goshi. I write, have some poetry out there, and I enjoy reading science fiction.
And I'm Jared. I run a Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel and on the Speculative Speculation podcast and other fine podcast on Page Chewing with
Sorry, I got a hat. Susanna.
You miss me.
Hello, I'm Susanna Imaginário. I'm the author of Timelessness, and I run the YouTube channel Den of the Weird. Chris?
I was starting to feel a bit unprepared there because I was like, I couldn't possibly be next, but normal service has been resumed. Yes, my name is Chris. I'm from the Chronicle Chris YouTube channel and from various podcasts on pagechewing.com with many of the fine folks here.
There you go.
So I didn't stop to discuss this before we started recording, but I assume most of this found this book groovy, like our friends in the book would say.
It was groovy. What a book. Wow.
Yeah.
It surprised me.
Yeah.
At every page, though, it's quite intense, but a lot of fun. I mean, for me, it was a game to try and figure it out. So I had a lot of fun with it, but some of the stuff in here, wow, it's just not quotable.
True.
Yeah, for me, it started off a bit like American Psycho in the sense of having characters that I did not like, who thought too much of themselves, and who seemed to be clueless that the rest of the world existed. But it really grew on me over the course of the book, and it went places I didn't quite expect it to, based on how it started. But I think what stood out the most for me was some of the philosophical discussions around death and what it could mean to be eternally alive and so on and so forth. But I guess one high-level question I had for all of you before we get into it, what do you think makes this a science fiction book?
I think that's the eternal question, yeah.
I have no idea.
It's it's
not.
it's science fiction, it's fantasy, but it's also neither of them. There is no fantastical magical element actually shown. It's kind of supposed in the story, which I think is very clever in a lot of ways. But it's like everything that happens in the desert in Arizona has a sort of mystical element to it, but actually the events and what actually transpires at the end, which is actually one of my favorite things, are very normal. You know, it is very much about a group mentality at play, you know, a human existence rather than anything mystical or magical that happens in it. It's just literally the workings of a close group knit of friends, close knit group of friends, should I say?
Yeah, it was yeah, that was a good word. Implied fantasy at the end, but no actual showing of it. It was interesting. It was these guys. You had these four guys going on this road trip, and it reminded me of kind of like an on the road type of situation, where um, you know that the Jack Kerouac famous novel
Mhm.
there, and it kind of echoed that kind of feel as they're going along, and then it kind of went into a heart of darkness type of situation where these guys were really exploring themselves and each other psychologically in order to figure out what makes them tick and what makes each of them tick, and they have this situation where they feel like somebody's going to die, and they really have to deep delve into themselves quite a bit in order to really look at, do they like themselves, do they know who they are, you know, and some of the revelations that they get about themselves they don't like at all, and that leads to the events at the end of the book, and I really thought Silverberg did a great job of exploring that and giving us such four unique characters to explore
Mhm.
that whole situation with. So it's pretty
Mhm.
intense.
Yeah. It was a brutal therapy session.
Mm. You know,
And
It's
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Leila. Go, please.
No, I came away thinking more it was surreal than and psychological than sci-fi. But now that you ask that question, I even wonder if at the time of its publication they really didn't know how to market it, And so I wonder, was it marketed as science fiction or fantasy or something like that? Um, so yeah, if anything, if we could think of it at all as science fiction, it might have something to do with the psychological realm. But
Mhm.
psychology itself is, some people say, a pseudoscience. So yeah, those are just my thoughts.
Yeah. It's sort of fascinating. I sort of couldn't wait for this discussion because to me, this is a book written about meals for meals in a lot of ways because this is an examination especially masculinity that's unformed, that kind of teenage early 20s. Um,
Mm.
I have to say, for all its surrealness and all its weirdness and all that kind of stuff, there is a truth that runs the whole way through about the experience of being a young man of 20s and how selfish and how insular and kind of unsure they are of themselves. Like they're all hiding something in sort of plain sight in some ways about themselves. And this kind of examination of this idea that they really want of eternal life. You know, this idea of this kind of goal for it. Some of them are very seriously looking for it, some of them are not, but actually not thinking about actually what the consequences of what eternal life mean. And especially in this case, the consequences of the actions that would have made them get eternal life. At that stage, I think that's really what is exciting about the book and what it goes to explore, because there is an awful lot of weird sex stuff, but males in their 20s go through some weird sex questions.
True.
Yeah, it was interesting to me how they all had really appalling revelations about themselves.
Mhm.
that does not feel representative, but I guess this isn't really a normal group of people either. But having there's also this idea of confession means that you're done with it now. You don't have to live with it. I think it was Oliver or one of them who says, "Yeah, that's crappy. You still have to deal with what you've done. I don't think this just makes it go away." Um, which begs the question. Eli had this really long term plan of how he'll live the next 1,000 years or so,
Yeah.
but he completely forgot about the guilt of having to live with having murdered or having had these people die for them um, for that long, which is interesting. Like the guilt that you feel now over this thing that is hurting you, um, you'll have to live with that forever if you with maybe something similar or worse if you live forever, which I'm starting to wonder if that was the point of that exercise. Like, think about how you're feeling now and think about whether you want to feel like that for eternity once your friends die when they do. um, but also I get the sense that going back to Jared's line about implication, the freighters, is that the pronunciation? The freighters never actually tell them how old they are. These kids just assume
Soon.
that they've been living forever, for 8,600 years apparently. It just feels like a lot of wishful thinking, and maybe he'll just have a normal length life where he's incredibly healthy like the Tibetan monks, and then he'll die. So
Good point.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, um, I agree with everything you all said. I think it is interesting that the ones that were most had the biggest secrets, I guess, or that's my interpretation, you know, were the ones to die. And I wonder, so that kind of, it makes you think, what is the author trying to say? That, um, my takeaway was that, I guess, is he saying people with guilt or shame or something that's not fitting into, societal norms, which of course, what's his name? Timothy did definitely show
Mhm.
a societal norm. Um, but you know, I did love how at the end of the book it left us with those different ways of looking at it. Um, because that aspect makes me uncomfortable in a sense, in terms of like it was some kind of perfection that the boys must seek. But then on the other side, it's like the one that got them all into that in the first place, he came out like fine, you know? I don't know. It's like he used his friends
Yeah.
to achieve what he wanted to achieve. And I like that. I like
Mm.
the ending. I don't like it in real life, but I liked the ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was and of course that was each. I think if you would have looked back at the book and look back at the characters early on in the book, you would find tons of clues about like Eli's using his friends. I think that's not new to him. That's something that he did previously, in
Yeah.
that and as we were going through the book, we found that out more and more, and so it was quite fitting that he ended up in the place that he did at the end of the book. Um, and I really love how, like, very early on in the book, each of these characters were assigned these roles, as they were going on their journey. Like, um, it says each he called it a gyre or something like that, realizes the possibilities inaccessible to the other. Each is useless without the other, but together they form a stable group in which all the skills are balanced. And so he points out that that each has an archetype as they go forward, and that they have to fulfill those roles as they get to the end of the story. And I thought it was just I thought it was just beautifully done, especially how as each chapter is one of the characters, is one of the archetypes, then they are exploring themselves and the other archetypes as they tell us about the story, one section at a time as we get there. And I thought it was a very structurally well put together book as far as that went, you know.
Extremely clever, actually. Too, on that point, Jared, when they are doing the confessions bit, each of the chapters is told from the person receiving the news. It's never told from the person that's giving the confession. And I was reading that going, this is such an interesting choice, if you know what I mean, because we are in the head of the person and what they think of the news being told to them, not the kind of the worry and the anxiety of I don't want to tell people this kind of thing. You're getting it into the thing, and we get an idea of what judgment looks like from a group of men towards friends. Like, they literally told each other some absolutely horrific stuff, and it sort of didn't flinch an awful lot. It didn't really adjust the friendship in any way. The only bit that really adjusted the friendship is when that circle of trust was broken. You know, when they did that kind of chain passing on, and when Eli broke that circle of trust, that's when the consequences started to really happen of it. But in their own right, each of those things that they told each other was like, I mean, you sexually assaulted your sister. I mean, it was almost like, who hasn't? And it was like, right, okay, geez, what? Okay, right. We are getting heightened versions of these confessions, like, because I think that makes the story work better in a lot of ways, because everybody has something that really hold dear. But it was like there was no like outright disgust. We kind of got the sense from Timothy when he was saying it that that's sort of what he was expecting to happen, but he didn't get it from the thing. And I think that at a certain point, that is also quite true of young men, where they just kind of go, friendship's kind of important and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, at the end of the book, there were some very harsh choices. Like, murder happens, you know, suicide happens. There were definite repercussions that they weren't dealing with in the moment. So there were consequences and things that happened to that fact of the actions and the confessions and stuff that happened.
Yeah, he captured the young. He captured the sense of the young man, or the not quite adult man, that they don't think about repercussions. They don't think about implications. They tend to take events, and I say they. That was me back then. They tend to take events that happen to them that are bad very quickly, and don't really process it maybe until later in life, or they process it in a very quick manner that's not relevant to the actual implications of what those events may be. And I think he captured that pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. I felt, as the confessions happened, each one, the sense I had was they don't have the emotional capacity yet to really understand where they are and what they're doing, most of them. And like Susanna said, I kept looking for clues, throughout. I thought the confessions would be kind of a clue as to which ones would go or stay. And the sister confession, I really did feel like he might end up being the suicide, but it wasn't. So that was good, good misdirection, I guess.
Yeah, I got it wrong as well. Sorry, Varsha. From the beginning, like after the first 4 chapters, I made my bets, and I bet that, and I bet that the one that was going to commit suicide would be Ned, and no, suicide would be Timothy, and Ned would be killed. because I thought, well, Oliver is just going to kill him. And so I was wrong. Halfway through the book, start getting a vibe of, okay, there's something here. But even at the end, I couldn't see how it would play it out until the secret was revealed. And it was like, oh, and there's this whole section in Oliver's POV where he's thinking about suicide and how he thought about it and planned it and decided. So I was like, you thought about it already, that detailed. And you really thought about it. So yeah.
Wasn't it
And I,
Oliver? Oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Lil.
No, wasn't it Oliver that wanted to be a surgeon? Was it? Yeah.
Yeah,
One
that
of
was
them. Yeah.
he's the one who's obsessed with living forever, and that seems to be a motivation for becoming a doctor too. Uh, the and yeah, I think someone else, was it Ned, who was also thinking about Oliver, that he could be convinced that with a certain philosophical bent that suicide is just as good as or death rather is just as good as living forever. But that's the other thing. They all had their own interpretation. Like, I mean, it's not that each had their own interpretation. They assumed that that was true too. They weren't explicitly told that two of your friends have to die. They did say ninth mystery, whatnot. But I also get the sense that if they had just stayed at the monastery, and if the living forever thing was true, maybe they would all have lived forever. But then there is also the fact that they're kind of trapped there. So that's what Timothy was trying to leave.
Mhm.
I love the implications that um, that never get confirmed.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
they get to the temple, they're told if you try to leave, we're gonna kill you. And they automatically take that at face value as part of this mystical trip that they're on in the search for eternal life. And you wonder about that because you don't actually see that. You don't actually. You wonder, like, what about, like, these monks that are here? There's so much left unanswered about that's left up to our imagination. Like, what are they doing there? Are they really that long lived? Like, they're servants. Are they voluntarily? What is going on in this place? We're never told. We never get any answers at all. We get the resolution to the story of the four boys, but we don't get any resolution at all about what this place actually is and what it's doing there, and just all these hints and innuendo and these stated consequences that bad things will happen to them if they don't follow the rules, but we don't actually see. The suicide and the murder happened because of themselves and not in the imagined directives, the directives they got from them, but they never tested those boundaries.
yeah,
But isn't that the whole point of the book? Is that
Mhm.
these four men are looking for meaning where there may be an answers where there don't seem to be any. I mean, that's
Right.
each one of the challenges they get given. They're never told what the purpose of the challenge is. They just sort of suppose that it's about this. So this bit where they meditate, they're supposed to do this inner reflection and find themselves. But again, they don't know that. The one with the three women that they're supposed to have sex with in the last three, they think it's a test of manhood. Again, nobody knows what that was actually about, but they're trying to search for meaning and all these things. And then when they conquer it in the way that in the conditions that they make up in their own mind, they think they've made progress as people. Where in actual fact, it's a lot of hokum and shit. It's just another cult in a lot of ways. But they derive real meaning from it, and that in its own right is sort of like the central theme of the entire book. Because these four men are lost, who are seeking for eternal life when they have literally their whole lives in front of them to live, and they are not going to do that because they're in this kind of competitive, streaky journey of discovery that they're doing, that they're willing to give their lives over for. It's, I think there's a tragedy to it in a lot of ways as well, which sort of gives it a bit more pathos and that kind of stuff towards the end when the events happen.
yeah. the thing that Eli was thinking to himself, right? All the things that he described, many of them, one, they don't have to happen in isolation, and two, they don't have to take the timelines like to feel. I guess he wanted to make a name for himself in each of those, but he could, shrink it all down and have a full life in 80 years, and that would be okay. But instead he risked dying early to get there, which I think towards the end, that last chapter, where I guess he hears the voice in his head asking him if it was all worth it, or whatever that that question was. I think that really, that's the most important thing, right? Like, is is this worth the things you did to get here? But also on the subject of we will kill you if some of your friends leave. Even that they don't say explicitly. I think they say something like you will be lost to us, or like you belong to us now, or something like that, which could just be they live forever in the monastery and never get to leave it. Okay. uh, yeah, they just don't ask any questions. They make a lot of assumptions.
Mhm.
Even to the fact that we don't really know if they will achieve eternal life and immortality.
Exactly.
I mean, they could still end up aging and, you know, that would
Yeah.
just stuck in that monastery for the rest of their lives. So in a sense, the people who died actually escaped that fate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I wouldn't want eternal life if I had to live in that place.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
It
the
wasn't
point. They started
the
giving
whole
out.
point that I'm trying to find a quote, but like for every eternity, there's an extinction or something like that.
Mm.
So and I didn't want. I I would love to be immortal, but not like this. No,
Mm.
this kind of immortality does not appeal at all. So yeah, maybe the other two got the better end of the deal. Yeah, free of guilt and free of that eternity.
Absolutely.
I sort of really appreciate the framing device of the book as well by telling you early on exactly what's going to happen, because we're almost like the readers, but in the space of the four men, because we're contemplating the same questions that they are, those that are buying into it anyway. If that was me in that situation, would I want to do it? Would I kill myself? Would I kill somebody else? Like that whole thing is running through every line of the book. And as we're on the journey with them and going through the little stages, we're kind of thinking to ourselves, because we know what the outcome of the book is going to be, which makes it an interesting book to talk about, because in some ways, by the framing device is the plot of the book and also the end of the book. So like when you're talking about it and describing it, you're not saying why the book's good or why I enjoy it, but you're literally spoiling the whole book in a lot of ways, aside from just who's who. And the who's who in its own right is not as important as the why that they do it, and why Timothy had to die, and why Oliver killed himself. At that point, like those revelations at the end are still massively impactful. Especially when you look at the people who survived, their impact and their role in the two deaths that came about, the very direct line and direct impact, and the fact that the two men who survived were the two probably most self-centered or self-interested people within the group of four. And I think there's something to be said from Silverberg about masculinity and roles of masculinity in society and the people that rise to the top in that way. I don't think that's by accident in a lot of ways. But I think that's that kind of, some people might read this book and go, they're the winners, and then other people will read the book and go, but they're actually the losers. Those that survive and win are the losers in this. So just like Leila said before, it's such a complex and interesting book for that, because it's not just telling the story. It's got these really big philosophical questions in it. Is living the be all and end all?
I just checked to see when the book was actually published. I knew it was 60s or 70s, but I'm always interested in looking at sci-fi fantasy through like that lens of the era that they're published in. And I can't help but notice, they were in the eastern US and they drove west, and that was always seen as like, the hip cool thing to do to get on Route 66 and drive
Mhm.
to California. So they went to Arizona, and Vietnam War was going on at that time. Um, so again, if you're drafted, do you join the cult, or
That's true.
what do you do? I mean, I'm just kind of thinking, not maybe not that he had all of that in his head while he was writing. He probably didn't, but I think thematically it could have touched people, in that way. Um, the road trip, the search for some kind of surreal experience, mystical experience. Yeah, I enjoy looking at it through that lens as well.
He refers to the Vietnam War in it, doesn't he? Because it's the brother that goes and dies in Vietnam. And I definitely think there is a thing about young 20s men that were literally disappearing off the face of the earth at that stage and either never coming home or killing themselves or being deeply affected by the events that happened in the war. So, like, this would be, if we're going to take that, meaning this is the second one in the Masterworks, because obviously Forever War was that as well.
Yeah.
The very first
Mhm.
book that we talked to was very much about the impact of the Vietnam War, especially on people that were there. So yeah, I agree with you. Lila, these kind of, we often say this, like science fiction is a book about the present when they were written, not about the future necessarily. It's just a framing device or a kind of a thing that you kind of put the characters in, and it makes this even more fascinating.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
1972.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had read Silverberg's some of his other stuff. He has a science fiction series called Madripoor, I think it
Mhm.
called, um, and it is not like this at all. It's more of your traditional sci fantasy type of
Okay.
story where you're set up on another planet and there's spaceships and there's stuff like that. But so that I was that's why I was so surprised when I started reading this. I was just like, wow, this is like nothing like what I read from him before. I think I've read a few novellas set in that world, and it was really it was a pleasant surprise because I think it shows his breadth of style, like his range on the styles he can use, and that's the strength of his writing.
Yeah.
I am curious to read more about
Yeah,
it.
definitely. Yeah. This I think we were talking a little bit last night, Jared, about it. This is the first I think novel in a while that has had really strong philosophical undertones to it in the series that we've read in a while. A lot of them haven't really. They've had some, but this one's very clearly wears its heart on its sleeve. About kind of. Well, I've got a story here. It's an interesting, entertaining story. It's very dark in a lot of ways, but it's really about other stuff and about philosophical kind of ruminations on life and the meaning of life and what's a good life and what's not a good life and all of that kind of stuff. And this is the kind of science fiction book that I've really enjoyed throughout the whole series more than kind of anything else. These things that have these dual layers of storytelling.
Another
Yeah,
aspect
and
of it, oh, go ahead,
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
is the whole idea of skull, which
Mm.
represent in some societies represents death, but in Mexican culture, they have the holiday every year. I think November 1st, if I'm right. I can't remember, but like they'll have candy skulls and stuff like that, and that's really more of a death and rebirth type of thing. Um, so just because it was set in Arizona, I feel like maybe some connections there as well.
Mm.
He did reference Aztec culture quite a bit
Yeah, it
Okay,
did.
yeah,
in,
that's right.
in the book. Yeah.
And the skull is the bit of the body that's left behind. Again, another kind of metaphor for the two men that are left behind after the events. What have you left
Yeah.
behind from the deaths? So clever.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I was gonna say the meaning of life, what you mentioned, Chris. It's interesting that we're getting that perspective from people who would have their whole life ahead of them, and what they want to do. I guess this intense desire to do so much that you want all the time in the world to do it, and it doesn't, even what you have ahead of you doesn't feel like enough. That's interesting. With I think Oliver's motivation, the other people largely felt like they were along for the ride.
Mhm.
Oliver desperately wanted to live forever, I think, because he was subject to death very early on. And I think mostly he, rather than live forever, he mostly just didn't want to get sick the way his parents did,
Yeah.
which was interesting. It was an interesting thought process to be in his head for, and I think that's the character I found most poignant, and I was sad in as much as I could be sad for any of them when he died. uh, but yeah, what speaking of the backstories and characters, did you guys have a favorite? Did you have any particular anecdote from any of their lives that stood out to you?
Hmm.
Hmm. I did kind of enjoy some of Ned's ruminations about his ability to like practice belief and disbelief in equal measure, and how he was able to like deal with that kind of cognitive dissonance that was going on in his head, and all the societal expectations of somebody who's gay, and has to deal with all those different things. um and it was so I think those kind of thoughts, and those kind of that kind of balancing of extremes within a person, I thought was pretty fascinating with him.
Yeah, and he has that whole thing about finding such contradictions poetic too, right?
Mhm.
And yeah,
Yeah.
I
nice.
thought it was interesting. I can't remember who owned the credit card, but the fact that they were in the journey across and he kept on putting on the credit card, which is literally he's going to pay it off in the future.
Mm,
Again, for things like it's putting credit to enjoy himself now that he's going to pay it off later. Again, there's loads of like little philosophical metaphors in here that's kind of used off, and the things that they wanted to do, they could do. This is again the great tragedy. But even Eli, when or maybe it was Oliver, we're trying to plan out the next 80 years of their life. They couldn't think any further on than that, than what would have been like a normal lifespan for them. Which again, they wanted eternal life without really having a plan for what they needed
yeah,
eternal life
yeah,
for. Other than
yeah.
to not get sick or nothing. So it was like almost like a folly from the very outset in terms of what they were doing it for. I actually thought what was going to happen, we were going to find out one of the four characters was terminally sick, and that would have been their reason for doing it. But that never transpired, obviously. So it was a fool's errand that they were going to go and do.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it felt like. Yeah, and that's exactly it. That's what I thought about Eli's thing too. That it felt like all the things he wanted to do felt like you could fit them, not on the same time spans as he mentioned, but you could fit them in a normal life.
Yeah.
Except for maybe the going to Mars bit, but then who knows? Who knows how far technology would have gotten in 80 years from wherever he was,
If Katy Perry can go to space in my lifetime, then anything's possible.
right? So, yeah, and it was also interesting in the beginning. I think I'm thinking of the things that, because it had a very rough start for me, the book, because I didn't like any of the characters as soon as we met them. It, but they had, what stood out to me right at the beginning, their first introductions, was all of them had created groups of two and two in their heads, and it was
Mm.
all for different reasons. Like
Yes.
Eli's thing was as stupid as they can drive and I can't, and like the drivers and the non-drivers, and he had this big philosophical connection to what it means to be able to drive, but that was just a bunch of rationalization in his head. But all of the others, they had groups of two and assumptions about who would go, who would die and who would live. But I think many of them, their sets of two matched, even though it was for different reasons. That was interesting. But yeah, I think it was the first philosophical discussion around the meaning of death that got me into the book. Did you guys have moments like that, or did you like this right at the beginning?
Right at the beginning, when I understood what was going on. Yeah, I
Okay,
was hooked.
nice.
Yeah, for me, I sort of enjoyed it at the start, but I didn't really start to love it until about the halfway point when it started to really do these ruminations on that kind of thing. Also about religion, the impact of religion. I think Silverberg was very keen to create a point that say this was not about religion. You know, this wasn't about that kind of belief at all. It wasn't tied to the theologies that we were born up with. It was tied to its own separate theology and mysticism at that part. Again, once it started stepping its toes into that kind of stuff, I was like, okay, this is really interesting to read because there's the story and the journey. You said On the Road. I sort of thought Stand By Me, The Body was another thing. It was another one that's very reminiscent of this as well. That kind of idea of these four young men kind of journeying off together to kind of do something, find something, but actually it's about them discovering themselves in some ways. So yeah, it was. By the time I got that stage, I was like, oh no, this is good. And as every page went towards the end, I was liking it more and more.
Yeah.
I got into it pretty much in the beginning because I was kind of interested in it because it was a road trip type, book, and I assumed they'd they would have some wild adventures, and I really until about halfway through the book, I really didn't believe they were going to find anything. So the ending, as it developed, I started realizing, okay, this is definitely where we're at. But I kept expecting them to for the book to go a different direction, like a wild goose chase sort of thing. Just by the by, one point that stands out to me that I can't remember who did it to who, but was it Eli that prevented Oliver from bringing a girl?
Oh yeah.
Who was that? I found that significant, as if he prevented who knows where that relationship would have gone? Probably nowhere, considering they met on the road. But that to me just spoke of a real life cut short, because he had this interest that he wanted to follow up, but he had to sublimate himself to the group. So, that just stands out to me as just something of interest that, in hindsight, I felt sorry for, because, he sublimated himself to the group, and then now, and I can't remember who it was. So he's either dead or he's stuck. Now.
There was also it was Ned that stopped him picking up the hitchhiker as well on the road.
Oh yeah,
that was another one to kind of break into the group and break the group up. So that happened multiple times, and something we talked about in a discussion for another book, where structurally it did these bits where it give you insight into each of the characters, so that the ending actually makes complete sense. It didn't kind of get to the end and said, "Oh, it did this," and then, as we were talking about in Reamdy, it didn't then proceed to give you the flashback to try and make sense of the action that just happened. It kind of did it gradually throughout the book, which made the end of it kind of go, okay. And when Oliver killed himself, we didn't need an explanation as to why. Like, there was literally, it was all there on the page from beforehand. The way that the conversation between Oliver and Ned was cut short with his insistence and his pushing himself on it. We didn't get a resolution to that scene. Very, very effective in terms of leading to that eventuality, without kind of paint by numbers and really dragging you along and kind of saying, well, what happened? Let's flash back to the end of that that scene in the room with the two of them talking. You know, there was no need for that because it's much more powerful without the kind of certainty.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny because you think about it. You mentioned a fool's errand, right? And as you read, as you starting off in this book, you could easily assume that fool's errand. But because this book is marketed as science fiction,
Mhm.
you still would have it in the back of your head that it might not be a fool's errand.
Mhm.
Uh, I think if it was marketed differently, you might not have such an expectation, and it's kind of strange in that manner that we because it's like if it did delve more into the fantasy of stuff into fantasy, it could very well not be that fool's errand, and it's interesting that yeah, we know it's a fool's errand now after having read the whole thing and realizing it's not actually sci-fi. It's 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 kind of contemporary, really, but so it's just interesting to think of it with expectations in certain ways and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant point. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. We probably wouldn't have given it much credence if it wasn't a sci-fi book.
Yeah. But it
I
also is not the type of book that I could give my mum to read.
No.
no.
Literary fiction. If I say this literary fiction book, I'm still not. No, my mum would not appreciate many of the events that happen in this book. Sister, no,
Nope.
no. It's just for us.
More than the sister, what stood out was the blasé reaction that Oliver had. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
do it because I didn't have the inclination, not because I didn't think about it. Okay, sir. um, yeah. Any other points or areas we haven't discussed yet?
No, it's a good one.
Brilliant book.
Yeah,
Mhm.
a good book.
Really good.
Good book. I guess one of those interesting unanimous opinion books. So that went well. And I think most of us are on the very good to masterwork scale on this. Layla hasn't put in her rating yet, but I did see Susanna's rating on Goodreads. So,
I just put
um,
Oh, Lila's is in. Yeah.
oh, you did?
Susanna.
Okay, nice.
yeah.
I
I I waffled because it's not sci-fi, but
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
it's very good.
Nice.
Masterwork.
Yay. Team Masterwork.
Mhm.
Oh.
Yes. So we will see everybody next month with Time Machine. Yeah,
Yeah.
The Time Machine is first by H.G. Wells. And then the following 3 months after that will be The War of the Worlds, also by H.G. Wells, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, and Ubik by Philip K. Dick. And then we'll be back to some more authors we haven't read before we meet back Frederick Pohl. Once again, if you'd like to join us for any of these, please consider checking out the Patreon forum. The discussions, again, are open to anybody interested, and all the planning happens on the forum. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.